I stopped financially supporting my sister's family, and my mother came to my workplace to cause a scene. My name is Ethan Parker. For years, I carried a weight nobody asked me to bear, paying for my sister's family, sacrificing my own dreams and peace. I was the silent provider, the invisible savior. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Ethan's Way. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It all started with a promise I never really made. My sister Rachel had 3 kids and a husband who never held a steady job. From the moment I started working full-time, I quietly sent money to help them groceries, bills, school fees, even some extra cash to keep the lights on. I wasn't rich by any means, but I thought family meant sacrifice. At first it felt like the right thing to do. I believed my support could be a temporary bridge to something better for them. But the bridge never got built. Instead, I found myself stuck, my own ambitions and savings draining away into a bottomless pit of excuses and dependency. Every month I'd send what I could, never enough, but always something. And every month Rachel's husband's paycheck didn't arrive. Her bills piled up, and her complaints about hard times echoed through our occasional phone calls. No gratitude, no effort to change, just a steady hand held out, expecting me to fill the gaps. The truth is, I wasn't just supporting them, I was enabling them. But I told myself family first. Years passed like this, and I slowly grew resentful, tired of being the bank and the punching bag for their frustrations. I missed out on chances to save for a home, invest in my own future, and even find peace in my personal life. The turning point came when I discovered that Rachel had spent money meant for the children's school on something else entirely. A brand new smartphone, the latest model, while the kids wore worn-out shoes and skipped meals. That was the day I decided I couldn't do it anymore. I stopped sending money. The silence that followed was deafening. Calls went unanswered, messages ignored. When I finally confronted Rachel, her voice was cold, accusing me of abandoning my family, of being selfish and heartless. I tried to explain that I wasn't abandoning them. I was setting boundaries I never had the courage to set before. But she wouldn't listen. Then came my mother. She was always the peacemaker, the one who insisted families stick together no matter what. But this time she took it a step further. One hectic afternoon, as I was deep in a meeting at work, my phone buzzed with an urgent message. "Mom's here. She's upset." Before I could even process the words, the door to my office burst open. There she was standing with fire in her eyes and fury in her voice, loudly accusing me of neglect and cruelty. My coworkers froze, heads turned, whispers spread. I wanted to disappear, but I couldn't. I had to face the storm I'd unwittingly invited. That day, my mother's public confrontation didn't just embarrass me, it exposed a deeper fracture in our family, one built on unspoken resentments, unmet expectations, and years of silence. I realized then that stopping the financial support wasn't just about money, it was about reclaiming my life, my respect, and forcing my family to see me as a person, not just a paycheck. If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. For as long as I can remember, I felt like the family's safety net, the one who always catches the falling pieces even when it costs me dearly. But that day, the breaking point wasn't about some abstract burden. It was a sharp, undeniable truth that cut deep. Rachel had always been comfortable relying on me, her younger brother, as if the money I sent was a right, not a kindness. I wanted to believe she was trying, that she was doing her best to make things better. But the truth was far from that. I found out about the new smartphone purely by chance. A casual visit to her house led to a conversation with one of her kids who proudly showed off the flashy device. When I pressed Rachel about it, she shrugged it off, saying, "We needed it for school and emergencies." But the truth, when I discovered later, was the money had come from a fund I'd specifically sent for groceries and the children's school supplies. That hit me harder than I expected. The money I had scrimped and saved giving up personal luxuries was being diverted to something unnecessary, while the basic needs were left unmet. It wasn't just careless spending, it felt like a betrayal. I remember that evening sitting alone in my small apartment, scrolling through old messages from Rachel asking for help, promising change, pleading for understanding. I realized these promises were empty words. She wasn't trying to improve her situation, she was comfortable in the dependency. That night I made a decision. I wouldn't send any more money, not until I saw real change. It was the first act of rebellion against a pattern that had trapped me for years. The next morning, I called Rachel. My voice was steady but firm. "Rachel, I can't keep doing this. I'm stopping the financial support. You need to figure things out on your own. Her reaction was what I expected, but still painful. She shouted, accused me of being heartless, reminded me that family is supposed to help each other no matter what. But I knew that endless help without effort on their part wasn't help, it was enabling. After that call, a thick silence settled between us. Our conversations dwindled, and when we did speak, it was filled with bitterness. Rachel accused me of abandoning her and her kids, and I tried to explain that setting boundaries wasn't abandonment, but my words seemed to fall on deaf ears. I didn't just lose money, I lost the easy access to my sister's life. Invitations to family dinners stopped, and my mother's calls became more insistent and loaded with subtle warnings about family loyalty. The tension was suffocating. At work, I was distracted. The thought of my fractured family gnawed at me, making concentration difficult. I wanted to focus on my career and future, but the emotional weight pulled me back. Then came the whispers, co-workers noticing my distracted mood, friends asking if something was wrong. I kept the story close, knowing that exposing family drama at work would only complicate things. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about respect, about being seen as a person and not just a source of support. But the hardest part was my mother. She had always been the glue holding us together, the one who preached unity and sacrifice. But when I stopped helping Rachel, she turned from peacekeeper to judge. At first, her calls were gentle, asking me to reconsider, reminding me that family comes first. But gradually her tone grew colder, her words sharper. I remember one call vividly. "Ethan, you're being selfish. Your sister needs you. The kids need you. Don't throw away what's important." I told her I wasn't trying to hurt anyone, but she wouldn't hear it. She saw my refusal as betrayal. Her disappointment felt like a slap, not just at me, but at everything I was trying to hold on to. The situation escalated until the day she showed up at my office. I had been caught off guard by the knock on my door, expecting a colleague or a delivery. Instead, my mother stood there, eyes blazing, voice loud enough to carry through the hallways. "You're ruining this family," she said. "You're destroying your sister's life and the children's future." I was mortified. Colleagues stopped their work to watch the confrontation unfold. Some looked sympathetic, others uncomfortable. I wanted to tell her to leave, to stop embarrassing us both, but the years of bottled up resentment spilled out. "I'm not destroying anyone's life," I said firmly. "I'm just tired of being the only one who cares." That day marked a turning point, not just for me, but for the whole family. The public nature of the confrontation forced everyone to face what had been simmering beneath the surface. It wasn't just a financial dispute, it was a clash of expectations. Love twisted by pain and frustration turned into bitterness. In the aftermath, I wrestled with guilt and doubt. Had I been too harsh? Was family supposed to mean endless sacrifice, no matter the cost? But deep down, I knew I couldn't continue living for everyone else while losing myself. If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. After my mother's explosive visit to my workplace, I thought the tension would finally come to a head and force some kind of resolution. But instead, the silence that followed was heavier than ever. Family conversations became stilted and awkward, peppered with accusations and barely concealed resentment. Rachel stopped answering my calls altogether, and my mother's messages turned from pleading to demanding. I felt the cold shoulder from people I had once called my closest family. The thing about cutting ties, even just financial ones, is that it doesn't just affect your bank account. It rattles the very foundations of relationships built on codependency, unspoken expectations, and fragile pride. At work, I was a different person. The man who once carried himself with quiet confidence now walked with a heavy step. My mind raced constantly between my duties as a manager and the emotional chaos unfolding at home. One afternoon, sitting at my desk, I caught my reflection in the computer screen. The face looking back was tired, drawn the kind of exhaustion that seeps beyond sleep and settles in the bones. The question gnawed at me: had I done the right thing? Had I been selfish, or had I finally stood up for myself? After years of being taken for granted, I found myself replaying every conversation, every fight, every quiet plea. I remembered the nights I skipped meals so I could send money, the sacrifices I made to keep my sister afloat. Was it really wrong to want more for myself? Was it wrong to want respect and reciprocity? The answer wasn't simple. My mother, the one who had stormed into my office that day, continued to pressure me relentlessly. She insisted on a family meeting, a chance to fix things before the damage became irreparable. I hesitated but agreed. Part of me hoped that maybe, just maybe, the conversation could bring understanding. The meeting was tense from the start. Rachel's eyes burned with resentment, my mother's face was etched with exhaustion, and I could feel the weight of years of pain hanging between us. When I spoke, I laid bare my frustrations. I told them about the sacrifices I'd made, the feeling of being used, the need for boundaries. Rachel fired back, accusing me of abandoning them in their time of need, of being cold and unfeeling. My mother tried to mediate, but even her words seemed to come with a heavy sigh, the weariness of someone who had spent decades trying to hold a fractured family together. Through the heated exchanges, a few uncomfortable truths emerged. My mother admitted that she had enabled Rachel's dependency, refusing to push her to be more responsible, because she didn't want to see her daughter struggle. Rachel revealed that she felt trapped, overwhelmed, and ashamed to ask anyone else for help. And I realized I had been silently resenting my family instead of openly communicating my limits. For the first time in years, we were all brutally honest, and it hurt. I ended the meeting by setting clear boundaries. My support wasn't unconditional anymore, and if changes weren't made, I would have to walk away entirely. That declaration shocked everyone, but it was necessary. It was the first step toward healing, not just for me, but for all of us. Rachel's anger lingered, and for a while it seemed the rift might never close. But slowly cracks appeared in the wall of resentment. My mother began to acknowledge the damage her enabling had caused, and Rachel started to take small, tentative steps toward independence. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but it was progress. Looking back, I realized that the hardest battles are often fought within families. The ties that bind us can also suffocate us, and sometimes breaking free is the only way to breathe again. If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. After the intense family meeting where everything long buried finally erupted to the surface, I expected the worst. I braced myself for weeks of cold shoulders, silent dinners, and hostile phone calls. But what followed caught me off guard, a fragile, tentative attempt at reconciliation. In the days after, the atmosphere around the family shifted, not suddenly or dramatically, but in small, almost imperceptible ways. The heavy weight of anger and resentment started to lift just enough to let light seep through the cracks. I noticed it first in the way Rachel answered my texts. Before, they were sharp and dismissive, dripping with bitterness or excuses. Now they were shorter, but calmer, sometimes even appreciative. "Got a part-time job interview today," she texted one morning. "Cutting back on the kids' treats. Trying to save." Simple statements, but they meant the world to me. They told me she was trying, really trying to change. My mother's tone softened as well. She stopped her urgent calls demanding I send money, and instead started calling, just to check in quietly without accusations. One afternoon after work, I was locking my car in the parking lot when I spotted Rachel waiting near the entrance. My heart skipped. After all the silence and tension, seeing her standing there, uncertain and nervous, was unexpected. "Ethan," she said, her voice, slow, eyes avoiding mine at first. Then she looked up, her gaze steady. "I came to say thank you." I blinked. The words stunned me. I wasn't sure what to say, for what I asked cautiously. "For making me see I need to take responsibility," she answered. "I'm sorry for everything, for the times I took your help for granted, for how I ignored your feelings. I'm trying to change." Her words didn't erase the years of hurt, but the sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. I saw my sister again, the person I loved, beneath the anger and excuses. That moment felt like a fragile bridge extending over a turbulent river. I wanted to cross it carefully. "I'm proud of you for saying that," I said. "It's not easy, but I want to believe we can find a better way." She smiled, a small, hesitant thing, but genuine. The days that followed were a roller coaster. Rachel began searching for work more seriously, taking baby steps towards financial independence. She started budgeting, cutting unnecessary expenses. Though there were setbacks and slip-ups, progress was unmistakable. My mother, though, was more complicated. The woman who stormed into my office accusing me of betrayal was now quieter, reflective. She seemed to carry the weight of her own regrets. One evening, she called. Her voice was softer than I'd heard in years. "Ethan, I have been thinking a lot about everything. Maybe I was wrong to protect Rachel so much. Maybe I enabled her instead of helping." Her admission was unexpected and humbling. I realized the burden she carried, a mother torn between protecting her child and demanding accountability. We talked for hours that night about family mistakes and the painful process of change. It wasn't easy. Old wounds ached, and old habits die hard. but the cracks in the armor of resentment were finally showing. Yet even with these hopeful signs, I couldn't shake the fear that this fragile peace could shatter at any moment. Trust is a delicate thread, easily broken and painstakingly repaired. Rachel's anger still flared at times, moments when she lashed out or retreated into silence. My mother's guilt sometimes turned into frustration, and I felt caught between wanting to support them and needing to protect myself. One afternoon, as I prepared to leave work, Rachel showed up again, this time with a quiet resolve. She wanted to talk. "Ethan," she began, eyes steady, "I know I've hurt you. I don't expect everything to fix overnight, but I want to try. For the kids. For us." Her words touched something deep inside me. I wanted to believe in her and us, but I also knew that hope had to be balanced with realism. We spoke openly about boundaries and expectations. I told her I wouldn't support them financially unless things truly changed. She promised she understood. For the first time, our conversation felt like a partnership, not a one-sided plea. As I drove home that evening, my mind wandered through the long, difficult road we'd traveled, the years of sacrifice, silence, anger, and finally the tentative steps toward healing. I realized that rebuilding family ties isn't about grand gestures or instant forgiveness. It's about small moments, honest conversations, shared struggles, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths. That evening, I felt a cautious hope. It wasn't a shining beacon, but a flicker, a light just strong enough to guide us forward. If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. The day my mother showed up at my workplace was unlike any other. It was a day I had unknowingly been bracing for a storm that had been brewing beneath the surface for years, finally breaking loose in the most public and humiliating way imaginable. It began with an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day filled with back-to-back meetings and the relentless hum of deadlines. I was leading a discussion with my team, trying to keep focus on the logistics project that demanded every ounce of my attention. My mind, however, was elsewhere, clouded with thoughts of the family drama I was desperate to escape. The past weeks had been an emotional whirlwind, Rachel's tentative attempts to get back on her feet, my mother's shifting tone, and the brittle peace that still felt like it might shatter at any moment. Then came the message that turned my world upside down. "Mom's here. She's upset." My stomach twisted. I wasn't ready for a confrontation, certainly not in the middle of my workplace surrounded by colleagues and clients. But there was no avoiding it. Before I could process what to do, the door to the conference room swung open with force. There she stood, my mother, a woman I'd always known as the calm peacemaker of our family, but now transformed into someone fierce and raw with emotion. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes blazing with a mixture of anger, disappointment, and hurt. "Ethan," her voice rang out loud and clear, silencing the room. All eyes turned toward us. Some wore curiosity, others thinly veiled judgment. I felt exposed like a private wound laid bare for all to see. She didn't wait for an invitation. Striding forward, she confronted me directly. "How could you do this? How could you stop supporting your sister and her children when they need you the most?" Her words were sharp, cutting through the sterile office air like a knife. I swallowed hard, trying to steady the whirlwind of emotions inside me. For years I had carried this burden, silently afraid to speak my truth because of the expectations and guilt wrapped up in family loyalty. But now, with all eyes on us, I summoned the courage to answer honestly. "I'm not abandoning them," I said, firmly meeting her gaze. "I'm setting boundaries that should have been set long ago. I can't keep sacrificing my future to cover mistakes that never change." Her face twisted in disbelief and pain. "Boundaries? You think walking away is a boundary? You call that love? You call that family?" "No," I replied, a voice rising slightly fueled by years of pent-up frustration. "I call it survival. I'm tired of being the only one who cares, the only one who tries. It's not selfish to want respect or to want people to take responsibility." Around us, the room remained silent tension, thick like smoke. I could feel the eyes of my coworkers, some shocked, others sympathetic, and a few clearly uncomfortable. The divide between my private world and professional life had been ripped open, and I was laid bare. My mother's features softened for a moment, a glint of tears shimmering in her eyes, but then hardened again. "You're tearing this family apart." "No," I said quietly. "I think it's already torn. Maybe this is the only way to start fixing it." She looked away, her body trembling. "You don't understand what family means." I took a breath, steadying myself. I think I understand it better than anyone. Family isn't just about giving money or covering up mistakes. It's about respect, honesty, and supporting each other, but that support has to be real, not one-sided. The confrontation, raw and painful, exposed everything we had all been avoiding. Years of unspoken anger, unmet expectations, and emotional exhaustion boiled over in that moment. I realized then that I had been carrying not just financial burdens, but the weight of a family's dysfunction all alone. After my mother left the room, slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but for me, nothing was the same. I was shaken, vulnerable, but also strangely relieved. The truth had been said aloud for once. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day's events in my mind. Guilt clawed at me. Had I been too harsh? Was I truly abandoning those who depended on me? Or was I finally standing up for myself, demanding the respect I deserved? The emotional storm inside was exhausting. In the days that followed, silence fell like a thick fog over the family. Rachel stopped answering my calls. My mother's messages shifted from accusatory to cold and distant. I was isolated, left alone to grapple with the consequences of speaking my truth. At work, I was distracted. I struggled to concentrate, my mind torn between pressing deadlines and the ever-growing chasm in my family. I felt the eyes of my colleagues, some sympathetic, some quietly judgmental. I wanted to be invisible, to escape the spotlight my private life had suddenly cast on me. Yet amid the silence, something began to change inside me. I realized that the sacrifices I'd made, the money, the time, the emotional labor had drained me to a breaking point. That setting boundaries, even painful ones, was necessary for my own survival. I began to see that love doesn't mean losing yourself in the process. It means sometimes making hard choices, even when others don't understand. Weeks passed without much contact. Then one evening, my phone rang, my mother's name flashing on the screen. Her voice was softer, tinged with regret. "Ethan, I've been thinking a lot. Maybe I was wrong to come to your office like that. Maybe I didn't see how much you've been carrying. We talked for a long time about family mistakes and the weight of expectations. I told her I wanted to heal, but only if things changed. She listened, really listened in a way she hadn't before. That conversation marked the start of a new chapter 1, where honesty replaced silence and boundaries were respected. But the path ahead was uncertain. Trust, once broken, is fragile. Rachel's anger still simmered beneath the surface, and my mother's guilt sometimes turned into frustration. I had to learn to protect myself while still holding space for those I loved. That day at work was a turning point. It taught me that sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought within families, battles for respect, understanding, and self-worth. If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. The days following the explosive confrontation at my workplace felt like walking through a fog. Every step was uncertain, every breath heavy with doubt. The silence that stretched between my sister, my mother, and me was suffocating, thicker and more painful than any argument. I found myself trapped in my own mind, replaying every moment, questioning every decision. Was I right to stop supporting them, or had I been cruel? Was I protecting myself, or simply running away from my responsibilities? These questions haunted me in the quiet hours of the night when the world was still, and my thoughts had no distractions. I felt torn between my desire for peace and my fear of losing what remained of my family. The weight of these emotions pressed down on me in unexpected ways. At work, I was distracted, unable to focus fully on the tasks at hand. The meetings that once energized me now drained my energy, leaving me restless and distant. Colleagues noticed the change, some offering concerned looks, others keeping their distance. One evening, after a particularly long day, I sat alone in my apartment, the silence around me almost unbearable. I pulled out my phone and began scrolling through old photos of family gatherings, birthdays, holidays, and simple moments when we were all together and happy. I saw smiles frozen in time, laughter captured in frames, and warmth radiating from faces I missed more than I realized. The images were bittersweet reminders of what had been and what I feared might be lost forever. I thought about my sister's children, innocent and unaware of the growing rift that surrounded them. I thought about my mother, a woman torn between love and fear, desperately trying to hold her family together, even if it meant enabling unhealthy patterns. And I thought about myself, the brother, the son, the man caught between love and self-preservation. That night the loneliness was overwhelming, but it also brought clarity. I knew I couldn't continue down this path of silent suffering. Something had to change, not just for them, but for me. The next day, I reached out to my mother. Our conversation was tentative, at first filled with awkward pauses and careful words. But as the minutes passed, a long overdue honesty began to surface. She spoke of her fears, the fear of losing her daughter, the fear of admitting she might have been wrong to shield Rachel from consequences. She confessed how hard it was to watch her family fall apart and how guilty she felt for not seeing the damage sooner. I shared my own fears and frustrations, how exhausted I was from carrying burdens alone, how much I longed for respect and genuine connection, and how scared I was of losing the family I loved. For the first time in months, we talked without anger or blame, just two people trying to understand each other amidst the chaos. Encouraged by this fragile truce, my mother suggested family counseling, a chance for all of us to speak openly with a neutral guide to help us navigate the painful truths we'd avoided for so long. At first I was hesitant. The wounds were raw and trust was fragile, but I knew deep down that if we wanted to heal, we needed help. Our sessions were difficult. We confronted uncomfortable truths, shared buried resentments, and faced the damage our silence and misunderstandings had caused. Rachel spoke about her own struggles, the shame of dependence, the fear of failure, and the overwhelming weight of trying to change after years of stagnation. My mother admitted to enabling patterns out of love, unwilling to see that her protection sometimes harmed more than helped. I spoke about the loneliness of being the silent provider, the emotional exhaustion, and the desperate need for boundaries and respect. Through the sessions, we began to listen, really listen without interrupting or defending. The walls between us started to crumble, replaced slowly by empathy and tentative understanding. But healing was far from linear. Outside the counseling room, the challenges of daily life tested us. Rachel found a part-time job, but the paycheck barely covered rent and necessities. Budgeting was a constant struggle, and the temptation to revert to old habits was ever present. My mother, despite her efforts, sometimes slipped back into old patterns, offering financial help that risked undermining the progress we were making. And I continued to enforce boundaries, reminding them gently but firmly that my support wasn't unconditional. The emotional toll was immense frustration, hope, setbacks, and small victories tangled together like threads in a complex tapestry. Yet amid the struggle, moments of genuine progress shone through. Rachel shared how proud she was when she bought groceries with her own money, how staying late at work to learn new skills made her feel alive again. My mother expressed gratitude for the counseling, saying it had opened her eyes to new ways of loving and supporting her family. And I began to imagine a future where I could love my family fiercely without losing myself in the process. That realization was both humbling and empowering. I understood finally that love doesn't require self-sacrifice to the point of destruction, that setting boundaries isn't rejection, but protection of myself and of the relationships I hope to mend. The road ahead was long, winding, and uncertain. Trust had to be rebuilt brick by brick, and forgiveness had to be earned, not demanded. But for the first time in a long while, I felt hope, a fragile flame. Yes, but enough to light the way forward. If you were in this situation, would you forgive or take revenge? Comment below to let us know. The decision to hold a family meeting was one I approached with a mix of hope and dread. After months of tension, silence, and fragile attempts at healing, it felt like the last chance to salvage something real or to finally let go. My mother was the one who proposed it. She wanted all of us, Rachel, the kids, and me to sit down in one room, air out everything, and find a way forward together. Part of me was skeptical. Could raw wounds like ours be laid open without causing more damage? But deep down, I knew that avoiding the conversation any longer was a luxury we couldn't afford. The day of the meeting, I arrived early, nervous and uncertain. The room was small but warm, with a round table that felt fitting, a symbol of equality, or at least the hope of it. Rachel showed up with the kids in tow, their eyes wide and curious. I saw the tension in her posture, the guarded way she held herself. We exchanged a nod, a silent acknowledgement of the storm we were about to weather. My mother arrived last, her face pale but resolute. She greeted us with a nervous smile, as if she understood the gravity of what lay ahead. We sat down. The silence stretched for a moment, thick and uncomfortable, before my mother cleared her throat and spoke. "We all love each other," she began, voice shaky but sincere. "But love isn't always enough. We need honesty, boundaries, and respect. That's why I asked us to come together today." Her words set the tone, and I felt the fragile hope flicker brighter. I took a deep breath and started my voice steady but tinged with emotion. I have been supporting Rachel and the kids for years. not because I wanted to control or punish, but because I care. But it became clear that my help was enabling a cycle of dependence and resentment for all of us. I felt unseen, taken for granted. That's why I stopped. Rachel's eyes flashed a mix of anger and hurt. You don't get to decide what I do or don't do. You abandoned us when we needed you most. Her voice cracked with frustration, and I saw the weight she carried, the pressure of responsibility, the shame and the fear of failure. I didn't abandon you, I replied calmly. I set limits because I was being drained. I wanted you to see that we all have to take responsibility for ourselves and each other. My mother nodded slowly. I realize now that I enabled Rachel too much. I was afraid of letting her fall, so I caught her every time, maybe too often. I see now that wasn't helping. Rachel looked away, tears glistening. I felt trapped and ashamed. I didn't want to ask anyone else for help because I was scared of disappointing you all. The honesty in her voice broke through the tension. For the first time in a long while, we weren't attacking each other. We were sharing our pain. The kids played quietly in the corner, oblivious to the heavy conversation, but offering a gentle reminder of what we were fighting for. I spoke again, softer this time. I want us to be a family that supports each other without resentment, but that means we all have to change, me included. My mother reached out and took my hand. I'm sorry for not seeing sooner how hard you've been carrying this. Rachel wiped her eyes. I want to try, for the kids, for us. We talked for hours, sometimes stumbling over words, sometimes sitting in silence to absorb the weight of what was said. It wasn't perfect. Old wounds ached and some feelings remained raw. But the conversation opened a door. Afterward, I felt a cautious optimism. Maybe this was the start of rebuilding, not just surviving. The weeks that followed tested us. Rachel struggled to find steady work and manage a budget she had never had to before. My mother learned to support without enabling, sometimes stumbling, but always willing to try. I stayed firm on boundaries, reminding myself and them that love without limits can become love that harms. We began to meet regularly, not always to talk about money or mistakes, but to share moments to laugh, and sometimes just to sit quietly together. It was a fragile peace, but it was peace nonetheless. I realized that family isn't a perfect picture. It's a mosaic of struggles, forgiveness, and small victories, and sometimes the hardest step toward healing is simply the willingness to sit down and talk, even when it scares you. If you were in this situation, what would you say at that family meeting? Would you forgive, or would you hold on to the pain? Comment below and share your thoughts. The days following our family meeting felt like stepping onto uncertain ground, the earth shifting beneath my feet with every tentative move. That fragile peace we'd begun to build was both a balm and a challenge, reminding me that healing isn't a destination, but a winding, often painful journey. Rachel was determined to turn her life around. The woman who once depended heavily on my financial support now carried a new weight, that of responsibility she hadn't fully embraced before. I watched as she juggled part-time work, childcare, and the endless demands of a household stretched thin. Her eyes bore the fatigue of sleepless nights and constant worry, but also a glimmer of hope. She was learning, stumbling, and slowly, painfully growing into a role she'd resisted for so long. There were moments when it all felt too much for her. I'd get calls from her, voice shaky, telling me she missed a shift because the kids were sick, or she'd forgotten to pay a bill on time. But even in those moments, there was no pleading or excuses, only honest admission of struggle. One afternoon, she confided Ethan, I don't know if I'm doing this right. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning, but I'm trying. I want to be better for the kids and for myself. Her vulnerability struck a chord deep within me. I realized that beneath the anger and past mistakes was a woman fighting to reclaim her dignity. My mother, too, was transforming. The fiery woman who had once stormed into my office demanding I continue supporting Rachel unconditionally was now quieter, more reflective. She confessed to me once that she'd spent years caught between protecting her daughter and allowing her to face reality, and that she had often chosen the easier path of protection even when it hurt more. She's scared, my mother said softly one evening, not just of failing, but of losing me, losing her family. I'm trying to let go, but it's hard. I nodded in understanding. The role of a parent, especially a mother, is complicated, filled with love, fear, and sometimes denial. At home, these shifts began to ripple outward. Family dinners, once filled with tense silences and veiled accusations, started to include laughter, shared stories, and moments of genuine connection. The kids, blissfully unaware of the adult struggles swirling around them, brought light and joy into our lives. One evening, as I helped Rachel prepare dinner, she looked up at me and said, "Thank you, Ethan, for not giving up on us, for believing we could be better." Her gratitude felt like a healing balm, easing years of pain and resentment. But despite these moments of progress, the road was far from smooth. Old wounds remained tender. Trust, once broken, is slow to mend. There were days when Rachel's frustration boiled over, when my mother's guilt turned into harsh words, and when I questioned whether I was being too harsh or not forgiving enough. The emotional roller coaster tested all of us. I wrestled privately with doubt and fear. Was I being too rigid? Was my insistence on boundaries pushing the family further apart? Or was it the only way to break the cycle? One afternoon, my mother invited me for coffee. We sat in a quiet cafe, the hum of conversation around us fading into the background as we focused on each other. "I want to apologize," she said quietly, "for the pain I caused, for enabling when I should have been firm, and for not seeing how much you were hurting." Her words brought tears to my eyes. I realized how much she carried as well, a mother's love complicated by fear and guilt. "I want us to be better," I said, "not perfect, but real. A family that supports without destroying." She smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile that I hadn't seen in years. That conversation felt like a turning point, a fragile beacon guiding us forward. Still, the challenges remained. Rachel struggled to manage her new responsibilities. The financial strain was real and relentless. Bills came due, car repairs needed, school supplies had to be bought. Every day was a balancing act. Sometimes old habits crept in. My mother, despite her efforts, occasionally slipped back into offering financial help that risked undoing progress. I had to remind her gently but firmly that true help meant supporting growth, not rescuing from consequences. And I too had to guard my own boundaries, learning when to say no without guilt, when to listen without taking over, and when to step back without abandoning. Amid the struggle, though, were moments of triumph. Rachel told me about the pride she felt buying groceries with her own money, the joy in managing the household budget, the small victories that built her confidence. My mother expressed gratitude for the counseling sessions, saying they opened her eyes to a new way of loving, one that included accountability and respect. And I found strength in knowing that I could love fiercely without losing myself, that setting limits was not rejection, but protection of the fragile ties that bound us. The road ahead was long and uncertain. Trust would need to be rebuilt brick by brick. Forgiveness would have to be earned, not demanded. But for the first time in a long while, I felt hope, a flickering flame, fragile, but bright enough to guide us forward. If you were in this situation, how would you hold on to hope amidst the struggles? Would you forgive, or would you protect yourself by keeping distance? Comment below and share your story. The family meeting had laid bare years of pain and unmet expectations, but what followed was a slow, often painful unraveling of all we thought we understood about each other and ourselves. The raw honesty exchanged that day opened wounds that hadn't fully healed, and the fragile bridge we tried to build seemed to sway with every gust of doubt or anger. In the days and weeks that followed, I noticed the undercurrents swirling beneath the surface currents of bitterness, frustration, and unresolved hurt that threatened to pull us apart again. It was as if the meeting had unearthed a torrent of emotions that had been buried deep for too long, and now they were flooding the spaces we shared. Rachel's bitterness was the most palpable. She was wrestling not only with the weight of her circumstances, but with the shame and guilt of having leaned so heavily on me for so long. I saw in the way she avoided eye contact during conversations, the sharpness in her tone when she spoke to me, and the heavy silence that followed many of our exchanges. One afternoon, I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen table, her face flushed with exhaustion and frustration. A pile of unopened bills lay in front of her, a stark reminder of the financial chaos that still engulfed her life. When she looked up and saw me, there was a storm behind her eyes. Without greeting, she spoke, her voice cracking under the weight of her emotions. "Do you think it's easy for me?" she demanded, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Do you know what it feels like to be judged every day by the people who are supposed to love you? To be told you're a failure over and over by your own family?" Her words stabbed at me. Years of resentment, shame, and fear were distilled into that one moment, raw and unfiltered. I wanted to respond with patience and understanding. I wanted to remind her that I was on her side, that I was fighting with her, not against her. But the fire in her eyes and the bitterness in her tone ignited a frustration within me I hadn't fully acknowledged. "I don't expect perfection," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "What I want is honesty, responsibility, a chance to trust that you're doing your best." She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "Honesty, responsibility. You've been supporting us all these years, and now you act like you're the victim." The kitchen felt colder, the distance between us wider than ever. Her words echoed, and I realized that no matter how much I wanted to fix things, the wounds ran deep. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, haunted by doubt. Had my decision to set boundaries only pushed her further away? Was my insistence on respect and responsibility being mistaken for coldness or abandonment? The questions circled relentlessly in my mind, robbing me of peace. It wasn't just Rachel struggling with the aftermath. My mother, the woman who had tried for decades to hold us all together, was caught in an impossible position. I found her one evening in the quiet of my apartment, tears streaming down her face. "I feel like I'm losing my daughter," she confessed, her voice trembling, "and I don't know how to help her without hurting her more." Her vulnerability revealed a truth I had long suspected, that beneath the strength of motherhood was a well of fear, guilt, and helplessness. Despite the tension and pain, we all clung to the hope that healing was still possible. But it was clear that setting boundaries was not a one-time fix. It was an ongoing, exhausting process, a dance of patience and firmness, forgiveness and accountability. I realized I needed to break down my own walls as well, to let Rachel and my mother see me, not just as the provider or the enforcer of rules, but as a flawed, vulnerable person trying to find his way. Slowly, I began to share my fears of losing the family I loved, of being misunderstood, of failing as a brother and son. In response, Rachel started to open up too. She spoke of the shame she felt, the crushing pressure of living under judgment, and the fear that she might never be able to break free from the cycles that bound her. My mother admitted how her fierce protectiveness had sometimes blinded her to the damage she was enabling, how she'd been afraid to face harsh realities for fear of losing her daughter altogether. Those conversations were raw and difficult, but they brought us closer in a way that silence never could. One afternoon, Rachel pulled me aside, her voice quiet and sincere. "Ethan, I know I haven't been easy. I'm sorry for the times I pushed you away. I want to really try." Her words were a balm to the scars I hadn't realized I was still carrying. Together, we committed to keep working, not just on money and responsibility, but on communication, understanding, and rebuilding trust. The path ahead was anything but smooth. There were days when anger flared, when harsh words were spoken in frustration, when hope felt distant and fragile. But with every challenge we learned. We grew stronger. We found new ways to listen, to support, and to hold each other accountable without tearing each other down. I learned the importance of listening without judgment, of supporting without enabling, and of standing firm without cruelty. Rachel learned to accept help without shame, to take responsibility without fear, and to believe in the possibility of change. My mother learned to balance love with accountability, to protect without smothering, and to forgive without forgetting. Together we navigated the difficult and often painful terrain of family healing, a journey marked by setbacks, growth, resilience, and above all, love. Looking back, I understand now that the hardest part was not setting boundaries or having difficult conversations. It was the willingness to keep showing up, to keep trying, even when it hurt, even when the wounds felt too deep. Family isn't about perfection. It's about showing up with honesty and love and the courage to face the hardest truths together. If you were in this situation, how would you rebuild trust after years of pain? Would you be patient, or would you walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The aftermath of our family meeting was like walking on shifting sands. Every step forward felt precarious, each move uncertain. The cracks we had exposed weren't just superficial. They were deep, jagged, and prone to reopening at the slightest pressure. Healing, I quickly learned, wasn't a steady climb, but a winding path littered with setbacks, doubts, and moments of fierce determination. Rachel's anger and bitterness didn't vanish overnight. It lingered in the way she sometimes avoided my calls, in the coldness behind her words, and in the quiet resentments that simmered beneath the surface. Our conversations were fraught with tension, each exchange a careful dance, balancing honesty and defense. One particularly difficult evening, I sat across from Rachel in the dim light of her small living room. The kids were asleep upstairs, oblivious to the storm that brewed between us. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she clutched a mug of tea, her eyes weary but resolute. "Ethan," she began, voice low but steady, "I know I've made mistakes. I know I've hurt you, but it's hard. It's so hard to change when the world keeps reminding you of your failures." Her words struck a chord deep within me. I saw not just the sister I'd argued with, but a woman battered by life's relentless challenges fighting to find solid ground. "I'm not expecting perfection," I replied gently. "I want us to be honest, to trust each other enough to face the hard truths and work through them." She nodded, but the weight of years hung heavy between us. Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning, and every time I reach out, I'm pulled back under. That night, I realized that Rachel's struggle wasn't just about finances or responsibility. It was about identity, pride, and the fear of failure that can paralyze even the strongest among us. At the same time, my mother was wrestling with her own demons. She'd always been the family's anchor, the one who held us together in stormy seas. But now I saw cracks in her armor too, moments of doubt, guilt, and exhaustion. One afternoon, over coffee at a quiet cafe, she opened up. "I never wanted this," she said, eyes glistening with tears. "I only wanted to protect my daughter. But I see now that protecting her sometimes meant shielding her from reality, and that hurt us all." Her confession was raw and heartfelt, revealing the complexity of love tangled with fear and denial. Despite the emotional turmoil, we pressed on. Counseling sessions became a lifeline, a place where truths could be spoken without judgment and where each of us could be vulnerable. The therapist helped us unpack years of pain, misunderstanding, and unmet expectations. Rachel spoke candidly about her shame and fear. My mother acknowledged her enabling tendencies, and I shared my exhaustion and need for respect. These sessions weren't easy. There were tears, arguments, and moments when it felt like we were tearing each other apart rather than building together. But slowly a new understanding began to emerge. Outside the sessions, life tested our resolve. Rachel found a part-time job, a small victory that brought pride, but also stress. Managing finances, parenting alone, and rebuilding self-confidence was a Herculean task. My mother tried to support her without stepping in too much, a delicate balance of encouragement and restraint that was unfamiliar and uncomfortable for both of them. And I stood firm on boundaries, reminding myself that love without limits can become love that harms. There were days when frustration boiled over, when harsh words were spoken in anger, when doubts crept in, and when hope seemed distant. But amidst the struggles, there were moments of grace. A smile shared over dinner, a thank you text after a hard day, a quiet understanding that spoke louder than words. One evening, after a particularly tough day, Rachel called me. "Ethan," she said softly, "I want you to know I'm trying. It's not perfect, but I'm fighting. For the kids, for us." Her words lifted a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. I replied, "I see you, Rachel, and I'm here. We're in this together." That simple exchange was a lifeline, a reminder that healing is a journey, not a destination. As the months passed, I learned more about the power of patience, forgiveness, and resilience. I saw that family isn't about never falling, but about helping each other get back up. I also learned that setting boundaries isn't about shutting people out, but about creating space for growth and respect. Through all the pain and struggle, a fragile hope took root, a hope that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild something stronger than before. If you were in this situation, how would you balance love and limits? How do you rebuild trust after years of hurt? Share your thoughts below. Months had passed since our family meeting, and the fragile hope we'd kindled had endured more storms than I ever anticipated. Healing, I learned, was neither linear nor guaranteed. It was a painstaking process of confrontation, compromise, and sometimes painful detours. But amidst the chaos, a subtle transformation was taking place, not just in Rachel or my mother, but in myself as well. My mother, once the fierce defender of her daughter's choices, began to show signs of change that surprised me. She no longer stormed into my office demanding I continue supporting Rachel unconditionally. Instead, she reached out with gentle concern, asking how she could help without undoing the progress we were making. One afternoon, she came to my apartment, a tentative smile on her face. "Ethan," she said softly, "I want to thank you for your patience. I'm trying to see things differently now, to support Rachel in ways that help her grow, not hold her back." Her words felt like an olive branch, a sign that the tides were turning. Rachel, too, had begun to embrace responsibility in ways I hadn't thought possible. She found steady work, managed her budget with care, and sought help when overwhelmed instead of retreating into denial. Watching her transform was bittersweet, a reminder of how far we'd come and how far we still had to go. Yet despite these victories, the scars of the past lingered. Rachel's anger, once blazing and fierce, had softened but not vanished. My mother's guilt sometimes spilled into frustration, and I struggled daily to balance love with the boundaries I'd fought so hard to establish. One evening, after a particularly tense family dinner, Rachel pulled me aside. "Ethan," she said, voice trembling, "I'm sorry for everything, for the pain, the anger. I want to do better for the kids, for us." Her vulnerability moved me deeply. I took her hands in mine and replied, "We all have scars, Rachel. Healing takes time, but I believe in you, in us." That night, as I lay awake, I reflected on the journey we'd taken, the battles fought, the bridges burned, and the fragile ones built anew. I realized that love in its truest form isn't easy or painless. It's messy, complicated, and sometimes heartbreaking, but it's also resilient. In the weeks that followed, my mother invited me to join her and Rachel for a community event, a chance to connect beyond the walls of our struggles. Sitting there watching my family interact with warmth and laughter, I felt a cautious optimism bloom. We weren't perfect, far from it, but we were trying, and in trying, we found a new kind of strength. If you were in this situation, how would you nurture hope when the past weighs heavy? Would you hold on or let go? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The months that followed our difficult conversations and fragile family meetings brought changes that were as slow as they were profound. Healing, I learned, was not a sudden event or a neat resolution, but an ongoing process, one filled with both setbacks and breakthroughs, doubts and hope. The tapestry of our family, once frayed and torn, was slowly being rewoven thread by fragile thread into something new, something stronger. Rachel's journey was the most remarkable. From a woman once consumed by anger, shame, and helplessness, she was becoming a person reclaiming her dignity and agency. That transformation didn't come easily. There were nights she cried in frustrations, mornings when she doubted her ability to change, and days when the weight of responsibility threatened to crush her spirit. But she kept moving forward, sometimes stumbling, sometimes sprinting, but always moving. I watched her balance, working part-time, managing the household and parenting with a strength I hadn't seen before. She began budgeting, saving a little here and there, making decisions with a thoughtfulness that was new to her. More than money or chores, though, she worked on herself, attending counseling sessions, admitting her fears, and reaching out for help instead of withdrawing. My mother's role in this transformation was equally significant. The woman who had once confronted me with fierce accusations demanding that I provide without limits was learning to love in a new way. She learned to step back to support Rachel's independence rather than smother it, and to trust the process of accountability. Her own vulnerability, once hidden beneath strength and resolve, emerged in soft confessions of guilt and hope. As for me, I found an unexpected peace in the boundaries I had so reluctantly set. The lines I drew were not walls, but bridges, paths that allowed love to flow without suffocation or sacrifice. I learned that protecting myself was not betrayal, but an act of preservation for my own sake and for the family I wanted to nurture. One evening, after a long day, we gathered in the living room, a scene so ordinary, yet so precious. The kids played and laughed, their innocent joy a balm for wounds still healing. Rachel and my mother sat side by side, sharing stories and quiet smiles. I watched from the doorway, a quiet gratitude swelling inside me. We weren't perfect, not by a long shot, but there was a new rhythm to our lives, a dance of forgiveness and respect, of patience and honesty. Later, when the house was quiet, I found myself alone with my thoughts. I reflected on the journey, the pain and progress, the fights and forgiveness. I understood now that family was not a flawless portrait, but a mosaic of imperfections stitched together with love and resilience. I knew challenges remained. Old wounds could reopen misunderstandings, could ignite tensions, and the past could cast long shadows over our present, but I was ready to face the uncertainty with courage and compassion, to keep showing up and choosing love no matter the cost. Because that, I realized, is what family truly means, not perfection, but persistence, not ease, but endurance. If you are on a similar path, wrestling with broken ties, seeking healing, balancing love and limits, I encourage you to hold on. Share your story, speak your truth, listen with empathy. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If this story touched you, please subscribe and comment below. Together, let's build a community where stories of struggle and hope can inspire and support us all.